The night was bitter and unforgiving, with a cold that crept through every crack and shadow. Ethan Cole, a long-haul truck driver, had spent decades navigating America's loneliest highways. But nothing had prepared him for what he'd find that night on the desolate, snow-covered stretch of Route 87. The blizzard had swallowed the road, and Ethan's headlights barely pierced through the thick curtain of snow. As he adjusted his rearview mirror, his eyes flickered to something ahead, a faint silhouette at the edge of the road. At first, he thought it was debris or perhaps an animal. But as he slowed his truck, his stomach churned. It wasn't an animal. He stopped the truck and jumped out, boots crunching against the icy ground. There, half buried in the snow, was a child. A little girl no older than 8. Her thin blue jacket clung to her small frame, completely inadequate against the biting cold. Golden hair matted with frost framed her face, as pale as the snow beneath her. "Hey?" Ethan whispered, crouching beside her, his breath visible in the freezing air. Trembling fingers pressed against her neck, searching desperately for a pulse. A faint rhythm greeted him. She was alive, but just barely. "Hang on, kid," he murmured, his voice breaking. "I've got you." As he carefully scooped her frail body into his arms, Ethan noticed something that made his heart sink further. Her stomach was swollen, unnaturally distended for a child so young. Was she sick? Starving? Injured? He didn't know, but he couldn't afford to waste time guessing. Sliding her into the passenger seat of his truck, he cranked the heat up to full blast. She stirred slightly, a soft whimper escaping her lips, but her eyes remained closed. Ethan wrapped his coat around her and grabbed the radio. "This is Ethan Cole, heading southbound on Route 87. Emergency. Found a young girl, maybe 8 years old, unconscious. Taking her to Blackwood General Hospital." The dispatcher's voice came through, calm but urgent. "Copy that. We'll notify the hospital. Units are en route." Ethan pressed down on the accelerator, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. The storm raged on, but all he could think about was one haunting question. Who could leave a child out here to die? The snow battered the windshield as if to bury the truth, but Ethan was determined to uncover it. Whatever had happened to this girl, it was only the beginning. The storm hadn't let up by the time Ethan pulled into the emergency bay of Blackwood General Hospital. He honked the horn, the sound echoing in the stillness. Within moments, a team of nurses and doctors rushed out, wheeling a gurney to the truck. Ethan climbed out, his breath fogging in the freezing air as he carried the girl to the gurney. "I found her on Route 87, he said, his voice hoarse. "She's been unconscious the whole way. And her stomach?" He trailed off, gesturing helplessly. A nurse inspected her briefly, her face tightening as she noticed the girl's distended abdomen. "We'll take it from here," she said briskly. The team wheeled her inside without hesitation. Ethan stood there, frozen in place as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. His mind raced with questions. Who was she? Why was she out there alone? And what in God's name had happened to her? "Mr. Cole?" A firm voice pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see a tall woman in a sheriff's uniform approaching him, her name badge reading Sheriff Grace Harlow. Her sharp eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that made him uneasy. "Can I have a word?" Ethan nodded, running a hand through his damp hair. "Of course." They stepped aside, the warm glow of the hospital lights casting long shadows in the snow. "Start from the beginning," Sheriff Harlow said. "How did you find her?" Ethan recounted every detail, the silhouette in the snow, the frantic drive through the storm. But as he spoke, he noticed the doubt creeping into her expression. "Why were you out there alone tonight?" she asked, her tone pointed. "I'm a trucker," Ethan replied, his frustration bubbling up. "That's my route. I just happened to see her." Harlow crossed her arms. "Convenient, isn't it? A lone trucker finds a child in the middle of nowhere." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Are you suggesting I had something to do with this?" "I'm saying we have to investigate every angle," she shot back. Before Ethan could respond, a nurse appeared in the doorway. "Sheriff, we need you inside. Now." Harlow gave him one last scrutinizing look before following the nurse. Ethan leaned against his truck, exhaling a shaky breath. He had done the right thing, he was sure of it. But why did it feel like he was the one on trial? Inside, the girl remained unconscious, her swollen stomach a mystery that baffled the doctors. From the observation window, Sheriff Harlow watched the scene unfold, her mind racing with questions of her own. Who was this girl? And more importantly, who had left her out there to die? Ethan didn't know it yet, but the girl wasn't just a victim. She was a ticking time bomb, and her presence would change everything. Ethan sat in the hospital waiting room, his foot tapping nervously against the linoleum floor. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed above him, matching the tension that had settled into his chest. Every passing doctor or nurse sent a jolt of hope through him, only to be dashed when they walked by without a word. Sheriff Harlow reappeared, her clipboard in hand. Her unyielding gaze hadn't softened. "We'll need you to stick around, Mr. Cole. The investigation is just beginning." Ethan crossed his arms. "Investigation into what? I found her and brought her here. That's it." "We'll see," Harlow replied curtly. Her words hung in the air like an accusation as she turned and walked away. Inside the emergency room, Dr. Olivia Mercer, the head physician, stood over the unconscious girl. The monitors beeped steadily as her team worked around her. Dr. Mercer frowned as she studied the scans. "Her vitals are stable, but this..." She pointed to the strange shapes visible in the imaging of the girl's abdomen. "It's not fluid or a mass. Whatever this is, it's unnatural." One of the nurses hesitated. "Could it be an infection? Something parasitic?" Dr. Mercer shook her head. "No fever, no signs of sepsis. This is something else. Get her prepped for an MRI." As the team adjusted the girl's position on the table, a soft whimper escaped her lips. Dr. Mercer leaned closer, surprised. "She's waking up," a nurse said in awe. The girl's eyelids fluttered open, her glassy, unfocused eyes darting around the room. Dr. Mercer crouched beside her, speaking gently. "Hi there, sweetheart. Can you hear me? You're safe now. You're at the hospital." Tears welled up in the girl's eyes, and her lips trembled. "Mommy," she whispered hoarsely. Her voice was barely audible, but it was enough to make Dr. Mercer's heart clench. "We're going to find her, I promise," Dr. Mercer said softly. "You're safe now." The girl's gaze shifted, filled with fear. Her small hands clutched the edges of the blanket as if bracing herself. "They'll come," she murmured, her voice trembling. "They'll find me." "Who?" Dr. Mercer asked, but the girl turned her face away, silent tears soaking the pillow. In the waiting room, Ethan's head snapped up as Dr. Mercer entered, her expression grave. "She's awake," she said, "but she's scared out of her mind." "Did she say anything?" Ethan asked. Dr. Mercer hesitated. "Just one thing. She's terrified someone is coming for her." Ethan's stomach dropped. Whoever had abandoned that girl in the snow wasn't finished with her. Not by a long shot. Ethan stood by the hospital room door, his arms crossed as he watched the girl through the window. She looked impossibly small in the oversized hospital bed, her pale face framed by a tangle of golden hair. Monitors beeped steadily beside her, but every now and then, her small body flinched, as if haunted by unseen memories. Dr. Mercer approached, her voice soft but urgent. "She's stable for now, but her condition is unusual. We've run imaging on her abdomen and whatever's inside her. It's not normal. We think it's some kind of implant." Ethan's brow furrowed. "An implant? What are you saying? That someone put something inside her?" Dr. Mercer nodded grimly. "Yes, and if I had to guess, it wasn't done with her consent." Before Ethan could respond, Sheriff Harlow strode up, her expression as hard as ever. "I need to speak with her," she said. "She's fragile, Sheriff," Dr. Mercer replied, a protective edge in her tone. "If you go in there, tread lightly." Ethan followed Harlow into the room, his presence offering an unspoken reassurance to the girl. She sat up slightly as they entered, her wide, frightened eyes locking onto him. You didn't leave me, she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan knelt beside her bed, offering a gentle smile. Of course not, kid. I'm not going anywhere. Harlow pulled up a chair, her tone surprisingly soft. Sweetheart, can you tell us your name? The girl hesitated, her small hands twisting the edge of the blanket. Clara, she said quietly. Okay, Clara, Harlow continued. Do you remember what happened? How you ended up on the road? Tears filled Clara's eyes. They left me, she whispered. The bad people. Ethan exchanged a sharp glance with Harlow. Who are the bad people, Clara? Can you tell us more? Clara hesitated, her hands trembling. They took me from my house. They said I was special, that I had to go with them. But then they hurt me. They put things inside me. Her voice broke, and she buried her face in the blanket. Harlow leaned closer, her tone gentle but firm. Do you remember what they looked like? Anything about them? Clara sniffled, peeking out from the blanket. There was a man with a scar on his face, and a lady. She didn't want them to hurt me. She said they were going too far. Ethan's fists clenched. He forced his voice to remain calm. Do you remember where they took you, Clara? It was cold, Clara murmured, her voice barely audible. Bright lights everywhere. Machines. They called it the lab. Harlow stood, her face grim. We'll get to the bottom of this, Clara. I promise. As they left the room, Ethan turned to Harlow. She's terrified. And now we know why. Harlow nodded, her jaw tight. This isn't just neglect or abandonment. This is organized, deliberate. Someone wanted her for something, and they won't stop until they have her again. Ethan's stomach churned. Whoever the bad people were, they had to be stopped. But deep down, he knew they were running out of time. The quiet hum of Blackwood General Hospital was shattered when the faint sound of alarms pierced the air. Sheriff Harlow, standing at the front desk, reached for her radio immediately. What's going on? She barked into the device. A voice crackled back, panic in every syllable. Movement on the perimeter. 3 black SUVs unmarked, approaching fast. Ethan, sitting outside Clara's room, tensed at the words. He bolted upright as Harlow stormed past him, barking orders to deputies stationed at the hospital entrance. Lock this place down. I want every exit covered. Inside her room, Clara sat frozen, her eyes wide with fear. They're here, she whispered, clutching the teddy bear Ethan had brought her earlier. Ethan rushed into the room, his face pale but determined. Clara, listen to me. He knelt in front of her. You're safe. Do you hear me? I won't let them take you. Dr. Mercer entered, her expression tight. We need to move her now. This room isn't secure. Ethan turned to Clara. You trust me, right? She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. Good, Ethan said, his voice firm. Stay with me, no matter what happens. The group hurried down the dimly lit hallways, Dr. Mercer pushing Clara in a wheelchair as Ethan and Harlow flanked them. Outside, the black SUVs screeched to a halt, and masked figures poured out, their movements sharp and calculated. They were armed and ready. Multiple hostiles, a deputy shouted over the radio. Gunfire erupted in the parking lot, echoing through the hospital walls. Ethan's grip on the small handgun Harlow had handed him earlier tightened. They turned a corner, only to find 2 masked intruders blocking the hallway ahead. Hand over the girl, one of them ordered, his voice cold and mechanical through the mask. Ethan stepped forward, shielding Clara with his body. Not a chance. The man raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Harlow acted. Her shot was clean, precise. The man crumpled to the floor, and his partner scrambled for cover. Move, Harlow barked. Get her to the emergency exit. As they pushed forward, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. These people weren't just here for Clara. They were here to finish what they'd started. The emergency exit loomed ahead, but the group skidded to a halt when more intruders appeared, blocking their path. Ethan's heart pounded as he realized they were surrounded. Stay behind me, he told Clara, his voice low but steady. Harlow raised her weapon again, but the odds were against them. Dr. Mercer stood frozen, her arms protectively around Clara. Suddenly, a deafening explosion rocked the hospital. The windows rattled, and smoke filled the air. What the hell was that? Ethan shouted over the chaos. Harlow's radio crackled. Backup's here, a deputy yelled. Feds are on the way. The intruders faltered for the first time, their movements less coordinated. Taking advantage of the distraction, Harlow fired again, forcing them back. Go! She shouted at Ethan and Mercer. Get her out of here. Ethan didn't hesitate. Scooping Clara into his arms, he sprinted through the emergency exit and into the frigid night. Dr. Mercer followed close behind as they reached a waiting vehicle, a nondescript black SUV with tinted windows. Harlow appeared moments later, breathless and covered in soot. Get her in the car, she barked, slamming the door shut as soon as they were inside. She jumped into the driver's seat and peeled out of the lot, leaving the chaos of the hospital behind. In the back seat, Clara clung to Ethan, her tiny frame trembling. I'm scared, she whispered. Ethan stroked her hair, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. I know, kiddo, but we're not going to let them hurt you. Not ever again. As the SUV disappeared into the snowy darkness, Clara's whispered words echoed in Ethan's mind. They'll find me. They always do. And Ethan couldn't shake the feeling she was right. The SUV raced through the snowy mountain roads, its tires kicking up slush as Sheriff Harlow navigated the winding paths. The glow of Blackwood General Hospital was long behind them, replaced by the suffocating darkness of the forest. Clara sat nestled against Ethan, her small fingers clutching the hem of his jacket. Dr. Mercer, seated beside her, whispered reassurances that seemed hollow in the tense silence. We'll be safe soon, Mercer said. But even she didn't sound convinced. We need a plan, Ethan said, his voice tight. They're not going to stop. Harlow nodded, her jaw clenched. I called in every favor I have. The FBI is on alert, but we don't have time to wait for them. If we want to end this, we have to go to the source. The source? Ethan asked, narrowing his eyes. Harlow glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Clara said something about a lab, and Mercer's imaging shows those implants are far beyond anything conventional. Someone is running this operation, and they're doing it from a central location. Ethan frowned. You think they have a base? Harlow pulled a folded map from the passenger seat and tossed it to Ethan. I think they have this. Ethan opened the map, his eyes scanning the red markings. One stood out. A remote location deep in the mountains, marked only with the word Nexus. What is it? Ethan asked, the word sounding like a threat. Dr. Mercer's voice was low. I've heard whispers about something like this in research circles. The Nexus is rumored to be a central hub for illegal experimentation. Off the grid, untouchable. Ethan looked at Harlow, his jaw tight. And you think that's where they're running this operation? I don't think, Harlow said grimly. I know. Clara stirred beside Ethan, her soft voice cutting through the tension. The Nexus. That's what they called it. Her words sent a chill through the SUV. It's where they hurt me. The bright lights, the machines. It's all there. Ethan's stomach turned. Then we shut it down. Harlow gripped the wheel tighter. We can't just storm a place like that, Ethan. It'll be fortified. Armed guards, surveillance, the works. I don't care, Ethan said. If that's where this nightmare ends, then that's where we go. The SUV crept closer to the Nexus, the forest growing denser with every mile. By the time they reached the edge of the marked coordinates, it was well past midnight. The air was bitterly cold, and the silence was oppressive. Harlow parked the SUV in the shadows, her eyes scanning the terrain. We go on foot from here, quiet and fast. They won't expect us this deep in the mountains. Ethan nodded, helping Clara into a heavy coat before turning to Mercer. Stay with her. I'll take the lead. I can handle myself, Mercer replied, but her voice trembled slightly. As they moved through the dense woods, the faint glow of floodlights began to pierce the darkness. The Nexus came into view, a sprawling concrete facility carved into the mountainside. It was sterile and cold, its design brutal and efficient. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their movements precise. Ethan's hands tightened into fists. "There it is," he whispered. "That's where they did this to her." Clara clung to Mercer, her eyes wide with fear. "They'll know we're here," she murmured. Harlow crouched beside Ethan, pulling out a pair of binoculars. "We'll split up," she said. "Ethan, you and I take the east entrance. Mercer, you stay with Clara and find somewhere safe to hide. If anything happens to us, get her out of here." "I'm not hiding," Mercer said firmly. "I'm coming with you." "No, you're not," Ethan said, his tone sharp. "Clara needs you." Mercer hesitated but finally nodded, pulling Clara closer. "Be careful." Ethan and Harlow moved toward the east entrance, their footsteps muffled by the snow. As they approached, Harlow pointed to a maintenance hatch partially hidden behind a cluster of trees. "That's our way in." Ethan glanced at her. "What happens if we're caught?" Harlow smirked faintly. "We're not getting caught." They slipped inside, the cold metal hatch creaking softly as it closed behind them. The air inside was colder than outside, a sterile chill that made Ethan's skin crawl. The faint hum of machinery vibrated through the walls. As they moved deeper into the facility, Ethan's pulse quickened. This was it, the heart of the operation. And the answers they needed were just beyond those cold, metallic walls. For Clara, for every child they had hurt, they wouldn't leave until the Nexus fell. The labyrinthine corridors of the Nexus were eerily silent, save for the faint hum of machinery. The stark, sterile walls seemed to close in on Ethan and Sheriff Harlow as they crept deeper into the facility. Every turn revealed more of the unsettling reality: medical equipment covered in dust, empty observation rooms, and eerie diagrams pinned to the walls. This place had once been alive with sinister purpose. Harlow's voice was low but firm. "We find their control center, download everything we can, and destroy this place. No loose ends." Ethan nodded, his knuckles white as he gripped the handgun Harlow had given him. "And what if we run into the people running this hellhole?" Harlow's lips tightened. "Then we finish it." Outside, Dr. Mercer and Clara crouched in the dense underbrush near the facility, hidden from the guards patrolling the perimeter. Clara clung to Mercer's arm, her face pale. "We shouldn't be here," she whispered. "They'll find us." Mercer stroked her hair gently. "Ethan and Sheriff Harlow are going to stop them. I promise." But deep down, Mercer felt the same dread. If they failed, there would be no escape. Inside, Ethan and Harlow reached a large, reinforced door labeled Control Center. A security keypad blinked beside it. Harlow gestured to Ethan. "Cover me." She pulled out a small device Lynn had given them before his injury, a portable codebreaker. She plugged it into the keypad, and after an agonizing 30 seconds, the lock clicked open. The room beyond was a stark contrast to the cold, empty corridors. Monitors lined the walls, each displaying live feeds of experiments, facility maps, and data logs. At the center of it all stood a man in a pristine lab coat, his back to them. "I was wondering when you'd arrive," the man said without turning. His voice was calm, almost amused. Ethan raised his weapon. "Turn around. Now." The man complied, his face sharp and eerily composed. "You must be Ethan Cole." The trucker turned vigilante. "I've been watching your progress. Impressive, but futile." "Who are you?" Harlow demanded, her gun trained on him. "I'm Dr. Richard Vale," he said smoothly, "Director of Operations for the Nexus Project." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You're the one who did this to Clara." Vale smiled faintly. "Clara is a remarkable child. An achievement. You've no idea how valuable she is. Her genetic profile, it's beyond perfection. She's the key to everything." "She's a child," Ethan spat. "Not an experiment." Vale's expression hardened. "You think shutting this facility down will stop us? You've already seen our reach. This is only one branch of a much larger operation." Harlow stepped forward. "Not anymore. You're done." Vale smirked. "Am I?" Before Ethan could react, Vale pressed a button on the console. An alarm blared, red lights flooding the room. You'll never make it out alive, Vale said. But even if you do, it won't matter. The data is already backed up. You've accomplished nothing. Ethan lunged forward, slamming Vale against the console. Where's the backup? Vale laughed, even as Ethan pinned him down. You'll never find it. Harlow moved to the console, furiously typing as she worked to override the system. Ethan, we don't have time. Reinforcements are already on the way. Then we destroy this place? Ethan growled. Outside, Mercer and Clara heard the alarms. Clara's eyes widened in terror. They know we're here. Mercer grabbed her hand. We need to move. As they began to retreat toward the tree line, Clara froze. No, she whispered, her voice trembling. I can't leave them. Clara, it's too dangerous, Mercer urged. But Clara shook her head, tears streaming down her face. They saved me. I can't let them die. Before Mercer could stop her, Clara ran toward the facility. Inside the control room, Harlow's voice cut through the chaos. I've set the system to overload. We've got 5 minutes to get out of here. Vale's eyes widened. You'll kill us all. That's the idea, Harlow said coldly. Suddenly, the door burst open, and Clara stood there, her small frame silhouetted against the red emergency lights. Clara? Ethan's heart stopped. I couldn't leave you, she cried. Damn it, Harlow muttered. We've got to go. Now. Ethan grabbed Clara, holding her close as they sprinted out of the control room. Behind them, Vale struggled against the zip ties Harlow had secured him with, screaming curses as the facility's alarms grew louder. The team raced through the corridors as the walls trembled, the overload causing small explosions throughout the building. Mercer appeared at the entrance, her face pale with relief as she saw them emerge. Come on, she shouted. They bolted into the forest, the facility erupting in flames behind them. The ground shook as the Nexus collapsed in on itself, the echoes of destruction reverberating through the trees. Hours later, as dawn broke over the mountains, the group huddled together near the SUV. Clara sat in Ethan's lap, her small hands clutching his jacket. She was safe. For the first time, she truly felt safe. It's over, Harlow said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. Ethan nodded, though his gaze remained on the horizon. For now. Mercer turned to Clara, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You're free now. They'll never hurt you again. Clara looked at Ethan, her voice soft but steady. Because of you. Ethan hugged her tightly, his throat tightening with emotion. Because of all of us. As the sun climbed higher, its warm rays cutting through the cold, the group stood together. They had faced the darkness, and though scars remained, they had won. The Nexus was gone. Clara was free. And for the first time, hope didn't feel so far away. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our latest videos. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Thank you all for taking the time to watch, and see you in the next video.